Hello, everyone. Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is November 3rd of 2022. Click on the subscribe button here in the lower right to subscribe to future episodes, and then also click on the notification bell in the far upper right to be notified when they're released. And then if you do that, you're going to find that you're going to be pleased with the election results next week. So our topic today is Americans never lost a war. Let me pull up my notes on this and we'll get started. When I was in graduate school studying for an MBA, my investments professor remarked one day to the class, quote, "Don't ever bet against America. We always come out on top," close quote. That attitude was common among my classmates, most of whom were not from the South. After the class, I overheard one or two of the students remark on the professor's point by noting that Americans had never lost a war. Well, of course, you and I know that's not true. The Americans of the Confederacy did indeed lose a war, and the adverse economic consequences lasted 100 years or more. My Northern classmates were largely ignorant of those penalties, and even the students from the South had become increasingly uninformed about the Civil War history because it had been declining for years, felt the same way. Confederate Memory came up unexpectedly in a 1974 television docudrama titled The Missiles of October, which was about the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. In the original version of the 1974 docudrama, the Nikita Khrushchev actor rehearses a private telephone conversation he wants to have with President Kennedy. Khrushchev wants to warn Kennedy that, except for Southerners, Americans don't know what war is really like. And he's speaking from experience because the Russians suffered 20 million dead in World War II, whereas America's dead were less than 500,000. That's like a 40-to-1 ratio. Similarly, if the Confederacy's casualty ratio were applied to America's current population, then her dead it would have totaled 17 million. Now, that's not as bad as Russia in World War II, but it's at least of the same magnitude. Be that as it may, I recently had breakfast with a stockbroker friend. When I asked for his view on the current economic situation, he responded, quote, "Don't sell now. This too shall pass," close quote. I hope he's right. Certainly his wisdom has been good in the past. His wisdom applied to the 1987 stock market crash, which was even sharper than the great crash of 1929. He was also correct concerning America's recovery from the 2008 mortgage lending crisis. Those are big historical examples in favor of his "this too shall pass" philosophy. Like others, however, he has little knowledge of and no appreciation for the wartime and postbellum experiences of the South. He shares the attitude of those who might say, "Hey, you know, America has never lost a war. We always come out on top in the long run." Well, in the case of the South, the long run was long indeed. 90 years after the end of the Civil War, the per capita income in the South was still only 73% of the national average. Even in 2022, 5 of the 10 states with the lowest per capita incomes are former Confederate states. Well, a "this too shall pass" attitude can provide reassurance during times of turmoil, such as the present. The Confederacy's defeat reveals, and it reminds us, that Americans don't always come out on top. It should remind us of that, because sometimes the difficulties are insurmountable. Thus, when we vote next week, Americans can decide whether irresponsible government should be allowed to continue. Consider 4 horrors that the cultural elite have foisted off on Americans at large in recent years. First, they gave us a 2-year COVID lockdown. It was the epitome of madness. It wrecked our economy and flooded the markets with cash in the form of money printed out of thin air. Valueless stuff. Even today, much of the COVID relief money is sloshing around the states where government bureaucrats spend it on such items as diversity, equity, and inclusion seminars. The result is ruinous inflation. We have this little man, Dr. Fauci, taking control of our entire economy, not just the United States, but in large part the world. Second, the elite gave us a new Supreme Court justice who admits she cannot even define what a woman is. This is madness. It is comical and deserves ridicule. Nonetheless, it's not being ridiculed, and the elites encourage teachers to shield gender-confused students from their own parents. They similarly endorse so-called gender-affirming surgery, in reality, genital mutilation and child abuse on minors when medical professionals feel it is justified. Often, however, the applicable, quote, medical professionals, close quote, earn a living from diagnosing and treating gender conditions that are incongruent with the child's sex at birth. Third, the elite have finagled onto innocent taxpayers a gigantic student loan forgiveness program that is a moral hazard to the nth degree. It permits some of America's most prosperous young adults, such as, doctors and lawyers that got their degrees recently through student loans, to dump their loan repayment obligations on taxpayers who've never co-signed the loans or even attended to college at all. It teaches the beneficiaries of those forgiven loans that they have no responsibility for their obligations. The 200% limit for Pell Grant recipients doubly enforces such a responsibility among Blacks, since Blacks account for 60% of Pell Grant recipients, but only 14% of America's population. Fourth, they have fomented racial division and hatred for the United States. Critical race theory and identity politics basically define groups of Americans as either victims or oppressors based upon immutable characteristics and immutable and irrelevant characteristics such as skin color and gender. While it is reassuring to know that the United States has survived every challenge she has faced to date, common sense dictates that there are limits to the stresses she can withstand. The cultural elite presently controlling the Democrat Party, the media, and academia have pushed us toward those limits for decades. If they take us beyond the boundary, the American middle class will collapse, and the country that remains will be of two classes, the elites and the poor. That's what we'll have. Okay, if you really want to understand the economic challenges of Reconstruction, get Southern Reconstruction by Philip Lee. That's $26 at Amazon. If you want an autographed copy, it's $40 from me. Just email me, Phil, Phil _ Lee, LEIGH at me.com. This book is really key to understanding what's going on. The history we're taught of Reconstruction now is focused almost 98% on race. There's little focus on economics. This book gives you a balanced view. We look at race, we analyze race, and we don't deny that the Ku Klux Klan did terrorize Blacks and some Northern Republicans. But here's the key point. The economy was in control of the Republican Party for 50 years after the Civil War, and all the major policies were contrary to the interests of the South. As late as 1930, the per capita income in the South was only 55% of the national average. what that means is if you take the other regions of the country collectively, compare it to the South, their per capita income was more than double that of the South. And even as late as 1950, it was close to that. So this book is going to, we're in, we're past the Civil War sesquicentennial. We're now in the Reconstruction era sesquicentennial. All of those stuff that's coming out of academia and elsewhere is just how evil the South was in the post-Civil War era. There's nothing to explain a balanced viewpoint. You can get that from Southern Reconstruction by Philip Lee. Now, if you don't care whether people are able to learn the truth about Reconstruction, then don't buy the book. But if it's important for you to that it's been important to you that the true history of Reconstruction is understood and influences the policies that we see in government today, then this book, Southern Reconstruction, is essential. Okay, that's our show for today. I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.